Welcome policymakers and guests to the 2021 Virtual Special Districts Tour. The theme of our tour today is the forefront of climate adaptation and resilience, confronting drought, wildfire, flooding, and emissions. The first thing I want to share with everybody is that today's tour will be recorded. And so fair warning to you on that. I'm sure Zoom already told you a couple of times. And I also want to let you know that our tour today is going to run about 60 minutes, maybe a little less, followed by about 30 minutes of Q&A. And the Q&A is a very important part of the tour. That's the part where you're the star, and we would highly encourage you and really welcome you to type your questions into the Q&A box right down at the bottom of the screen there. And we will review those questions throughout the tour, have them all queued up so that our expert panelists can get you some answers on all of the questions that you may have. And it's really that interaction between local, state, and federal leaders that this tour is all about. So please don't be shy. Type in your questions now as the tour is running, or you can wait till the end. Either way, we want to hear from you and we want to have a conversation with you. We have a really outstanding tour lined up for you today on a very important topic for our communities and for the entire state of California, this country, as well as really our world. And so we're pleased that you could be here. We have a long list of attendees from some very important offices all throughout the state and this country. And this is going to be an important dialogue here today. And our leaders, our stars of the show, are really going to be our special district officials that we have. We also have, in addition to myself, from CSDA, our legislative representative, Alyssa Silhai, who I will introduce in just a moment. Alyssa is our lead on climate issues, environmental issues, public works issues, and emergency preparedness issues. And so she's going to give us just a quick rundown of our topic today before we get going. But before that, let me just name off some of the officials that you're going to hear from, some of the stars. They include the General Manager of Sonoma Water, Grant Davis, the Director of Legislative Affairs and Community Relations from AC Transit, Claudia Burgos, as well as the District Manager of the Paradise Recreation and Park District, Dan Efsef. And so in a few moments, we'll get to hear from each of them on some really exciting, innovative, cutting-edge projects that their districts are putting forward in their communities that will have some significance, not just for our state, but again, for throughout the country. Before we move on to that, we are going to do a brief overview of special districts, because at the end of the day, that's the one thing that unites all three of the districts that you're going to be hearing from today, is that they are a form of local government called special districts. Now, we like to think of special districts as the most local of local governments. And hopefully you'll get to see why throughout this tour. And we'd love to entertain your questions along those lines and along what is it that makes special districts so special. But some of you might still be asking the question, well, what is a special district? And so the best way and the easiest way to really start that dialogue is to talk about the types of special districts. And throughout the country, we have many types of districts, and they focus on providing a specific service to their community or region. They include water, wastewater, fire protection, solid waste, transit, mosquito abatement, parks and recreation. Most of the types of local service that you experience in any given community can be provided by special districts and are provided by special districts throughout the state in different communities and regions. They tend to serve not just unincorporated areas, but also many of our incorporated areas. Many of our urban coastal areas of the state are served by larger regional districts, whereas many of our rural inland areas of the state might be served by smaller special districts that are providing the specific needs that that community has asked for. They operate critical facilities and infrastructure all throughout the country, as you can see a list there at the middle of your screen. And they serve populations both large and small, as well as from our survey of our members, nearly 60% of our districts serve a disadvantaged community. So throughout the country, almost 20% of local services are provided by special districts, about a third of healthcare, 15% of fire protection, 15% of recreation and parks. And they provide about 41% of the utilities throughout our country. And so in many ways, special districts really are the backbone of our economy. There's 30,000 of them all throughout the United States, 2,000 independent special districts right here in California. And those 2,000 special districts employ 120,000 frontline workers and first responders in our state. Now, we call special districts local service specialists. And I like to call them that because the word special district is sometimes, hard to imagine what it actually is. But when you think of that root word of special, it's that they're specialists, that they focus on doing one thing and doing it better than anybody else. That's their goal, to provide the best possible service to a specific community. That's the local part. And then the service is really what they do. Each of them provides a specific service, in some cases a small suite of services, but they really stay focused in on being the best possible providers at the most efficient and effective way. So how are they established and governed? Well, they're formed through a public process. Most of them are formed at the local level through a group of community members that decide there's a service that they're missing or that they'd like to be done better. And so they want to form a local government that can focus on doing that service, and they're willing to pay for it if they can have local control over it. They want to form a local body, a local board to oversee it. And so they go through typically what we call the Local Agency Formation Commission, or the LAFCO. Special districts can also be formed by the legislature. There's about 140, 150 of them that are done in that manner. The other 2,000 are formed locally. And they're governed by a board of directors. Typically, that's elected. About 2/3 to 3/4 of special districts, independent special districts, have an elected board. Others are appointed, and the independent districts to a fixed term, as you'll see. They're all required to follow the state sunshine laws. So that's things like the Brown Act, the Public Records Act. They undergo regular audits, typically once a year. They have to submit their financial transaction reports and their compensation reports to the state controller's office. Those are all available on their websites and on the state's website. And so how did these special districts come about? Well, nationally, it really started in the 18th century with parks, but here in California, it started in the 19th century when, in 1887, the Turlock Irrigation District was formed. Now that, you could imagine a group of farmers come together, decide, hey, if we all work together, we can improve all of our lots. If we have reliable water delivery that all of our farms can benefit from, that will be good for all of us. So by working together, that's what special districts are all about. We can come together, we can pay for this, and we can oversee it and ensure that it's done the right way. The numbers of special districts really grew rapidly after World War II when our population in California grew. The baby boom was happening. People were moving into the state. People were needing services. New communities were being established, and the most nimble, fastest way to establish those services was through a special district. In the 1970s, that started to stabilize for a few different reasons. One, the local agency formation commissions that I mentioned were created in the late 1960s. Secondly, Proposition 13 was passed in 1978, which limited local revenue opportunities. And lastly, there was just more emphasis on how do we do this in the most organized fashion as our state starts to evolve and as the population starts to change. And so what's really important is to note that all local governments, including special districts, and I would say in particular special districts, are designed to evolve with communities' needs. And so as they grow from a rural community to a suburban to an urban, there are ways that those special districts evolve to continue to meet those needs. And that's exactly what's happened. In fact, since the 1990s, the number of special districts has very much stabilized and actually reduced by just a couple of percentage points as they've consolidated and found ways to provide economies of scale and maximize their services. So where does their funding come from? Well, Despite providing about 40% of utilities and about 15% of recreation and parks and 15% of fire protection and all of the other statistics that we went over earlier, only about 8% of California's statewide property tax goes to special districts. The rest of the revenue that they receive is provided through rates for service. They do not receive a share of the sales tax, except in very extremely limited circumstances. But that property tax really forms a foundation for their services. That's the base of what they do. And it's very important to certain particular special districts like fire protection districts and recreation and park districts in particular, whose services really are not as conducive to rates as some other types. When they pass any taxes or fees, and particularly taxes, they must go to the voters for approval, but even rates for a water district or a wastewater district, those have to be approved through the Proposition 218 protest proceedings. And so with everything that a special district does, from the election of its board members to the approval of its rates and revenues and fees, those are all done through a public process with voter oversight. Next, I want to explain very briefly just the difference between independent and dependent special districts. So while all special districts are special and they're all separate from cities and counties, there is a distinction there where an independent special district obtains its authority directly from the community with a governing body that's either elected or appointed to a fixed term. So that governing body is directly accountable to the public that it serves, whereas a dependent special district is accountable to its appointing authority because its board members serve at the pleasure of that appointing authority, or they serve in an ex officio capacity. And so there are both independent and dependent special districts out there serving the state of California. But all special districts, we believe, are community-driven and future-focused. And we think that today's tour is going to shine a bright light on that with Sonoma Water, AC Transit, and Paradise Recreation and Park District as just 3 examples of many more. 3 additional examples that I'll briefly mention, both large and small. On the large side would be your Sacramento Municipal Utilities District. Most of you who work in the state capitol are probably well familiar because most of you probably receive your electricity from them while you receive your gas from PG&E. SMUD was the first commercial solar plant, first green pricing, first time-based rates, first solar-powered electric vehicle charging stations in the Western United States, and the first large California utility to reach 20% renewable energy. They're currently at 50% with a plan to go to 0 carbon emissions by 2030. Another large special district, Orange County Water District, obviously in Orange County, California, in partnership with its sister agency, the Orange County Sanitation District, has developed the world's largest advanced purification system for potable reuse. It serves nearly 1 million residents with recycled water. This district is also conducting the nation's largest pilot testing program for the treatment of PFAS. And most of you probably know about PFAS. If you're not, I'm sure you will soon. It's a big challenge for all water providers throughout the state and country. It's something that's being focused on heavily right now, and Orange County Water District is leading the way. And lastly, a smaller special district, Rosamond Community Services District in Kern County. This shows an example of how it's not just about the size or about the revenue stream for these special districts, because while the big ones are at the cutting edge solving these problems for world-class challenges, world-class solutions, the small ones are finding world-class ability to do more with less, to be innovative even at a small scale. And Rosamond Community Services District is an example of that, where they upgraded an effluent project in order to provide a new direction for all small agencies, really, within adjudicated groundwater basins. And so their simple but innovative project has received both percolation credits, it is allowed to recharge during the drought, and it's maintained beneficial use despite their funding limitations. Basically, through a denitrification process, they've been able to overcome a lot of hurdles that were previously in place with certain groundwater and recycled water projects. And Rosamond Community Services District has now established a relatively simple and cost-effective way to meet their needs in that community in Kern County that otherwise is really up in a challenging place when it comes to finding ways to continue to provide reliable water. And it's an example that might be applicable to other local agencies and communities throughout the state, particularly in the Central Valley. With that, I want to just mention a few ideas on how you or your constituents could get involved. Of course, there are always employment and volunteer opportunities. There are opportunities to be elected to or appointed to local boards of special districts, and anybody is always welcome to attend a public board meeting. All special districts can be found on CSDA's map. It can be a little challenging to first learn the navigational tools, but at that point, once you get it down, it's a wealth of information with all special districts listed on the map and about 90 to 99% with their boundaries marked out on that map. Lastly, I just want to say that myself and our team here at CSDA, we are at your service. This is my contact information. You can find all of our information on our website at csda.net. We also have a public outreach campaign that's run through districtsmakethedifference.org. That's a nationwide public outreach campaign to raise awareness and understanding about special districts that provide these services to your communities. And of course, please follow us on Twitter at Local Districts. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague here at CSDA, Alyssa Silhai, our legislative representative. Alyssa?
Thank you, Kyle. Good morning. As Kyle said, I'm Alyssa Silhai. I'm one of the legislative representatives here with CSDA. As he mentioned, my issue areas cover the environment, emergency response and disaster preparedness, and public works. I'm so glad you're able to join us this morning and hope that you find the information presented today informative and useful as you move forward in seeking attainable solutions to bolster California's communities against the next disaster. So as Kyle mentioned, today we're going to virtually tour 3 special districts to learn some of the innovative ways that these local agencies are addressing California's biggest statewide problems at the local level, working to ensure a sustainable and resilient future for their communities. So first, we're going to begin with Sonoma Water Agency. They are known as Sonoma Water, and we're going to be learning about the Advanced Quantitative Precipitation Information System, easier said as AQPI. It is a regional project awarded to Sonoma Water and collaborating partners by the California Department of Water Resources. It consists of improved weather radar data that will be used to improve short-term prediction of precipitation and forecasting flooding around the San Francisco Bay coastline. It's very interesting. Next, we will visit the Alameda Contra Costa Transit District, also known as AC Transit, to learn how they are addressing transportation needs with innovative strategies and their progress in advancing towards a zero-emission future through clean transit and green jobs. And finally, we will end with the Paradise Recreation and Park District. They're located in the heart of the most destructive wildfire in California's history, the Camp Fire, the 2018 Camp Fire. And they have been on the forefront of exploring landscape-level defensible space as a wildfire mitigation tool to protect the high fire risk communities in their jurisdiction. If you have follow-up questions following the tour this morning or at any time throughout the year, please reach out. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. If I don't have the answers, I will be able to hook you into whoever here or whatever resources I have to be able to get those questions answered. And we hope that you enjoy your tour. Thank you.
Thank you, Alyssa. And now we're going to transport all of you into the Bay Area to learn about those atmospheric rivers that we've been hearing so much about in the news these last couple of weeks, and find out about what could be some solutions to our drought, to flooding, and even potentially to some of our wildfire concerns.
Sonoma County and our area is sort of the epicenter of the impacts of climate change. Water managers are challenged increasingly to have to manage their systems for extremes, whether it's drought, heat, fire, weather. It's all coming together on climate change.
We've seen new extremes, both on the wet and the dry side. We saw a year without a snowpack almost back in 2015. We saw one of the wettest years in 2017. We saw a year in 2019 that was very wet on the coast with severe coastal flooding, and now we are in the midst of a record-setting drought.
In San Jose, not too many years ago, you had a very large event that caused a significant amount of flooding.
You know, I came from Malvisa, born and raised there. My family's been there about 110 years. I've lost everything I own 3 times the floods. So if you can do some predicting in scientific ways and be close to what is accurate, we can save lives and property.
The truth is we didn't have the technology available at the time to be able to identify where that flooding was going to take place, exactly at what time, to be able to evacuate the area. Our extreme events are actually called atmospheric rivers. These are storms that come in low off the coasts, and they literally stall out over the lower mountains, and they drop a significant amount of rainfall. An atmospheric river is literally our form of extreme weather. The state of California gets droughts busted by the fact that atmospheric rivers come in and drop their water supply on an area. It's also true that the lack of atmospheric rivers is a cause directly related to drought. So we have to do a better job of understanding atmospheric rivers.
As air gets warmer, it can hold more water vapor. And so our atmospheric rivers are expected to become more intense. And as there's more water vapor in the air moving as it comes in, interacts with California's topography, we expect to see those greater precipitation extremes.
In the Bay Area, this is one of the best examples of a truly integrated water management investment. We're putting 6 radars up around the Bay Area to understand more precisely what our weather patterns are going to be. The radar system that we're putting together is called AQPI. Stands for Advanced Quantitative Precipitation Information.
Traditional radar systems are designed for large areas and deep, so higher up into the atmosphere precipitation processes. X-band radar specialize in spaces that the large systems may not see, Bay Area being one of those key areas, and at elevations more tuned in to atmospheric river precipitation.
X-band radars have shorter range, about 40 kilometers, than traditional radars, but they have about 100 times the spatial resolution and about 3 times the frequency. So they're capturing an image every 1 to 2 minutes versus every 5 to 6. That's important because when you are in the Emergency Operations Center, you see a very detailed high-intensity rainfall cells. You want to know where it's raining hard. You can really see that with the X-band radar images.
Without the advanced warning, there's less time to react and respond to these emergencies that happen.
Guessing doesn't do you a thing, but when you have scientific research and be able to find out about weather and patterns, it benefits everybody.
AQPI is a perfect example of how a special district can be in partnership with other special districts, and not just solving problems in our own area, but our entire region and ultimately the state of California. We're uniquely positioned with a board of directors that's focused on a mission, that's delegated authority, and they're special districts all over the state doing different functions, but they really are very effective, solution-oriented organizations that California relies on to achieve its goal of sustainability and resource management. What we've chosen to do is know our DNA is about innovation, and know that change is not always comfortable or easy, but somebody has to lead the way and be prepared to pay those costs. The next band radar through AQPI is something that's going to work, and we intend to then replicate that throughout the state and beyond.
The Bay Area is a perfect pilot project for this technology. Beyond that, atmospheric rivers have the potential to extend inland. The ability then to tailor the concept is a fantastic way for the nation to move forward in responding to the weather conditions that are evolving.
This type of investment is so smart. It's a way of taking the existing infrastructure that we've already invested in and putting it to a higher and better use. By better managing our reservoirs, using existing technology and current radar technology, you'll be able to make decisions that'll save you not only hundreds of millions of dollars, but also human lives.
I hope you found that video as interesting as I did. My 6-year-old son kept on wanting me to show it to him over and over again, so I feel like the team did a great job with it. And now to help explain AQPI further and the great partnership that we have there in the Bay Area is the general manager of Sonoma Water, Grant Davis.
Good morning, Kyle. Thank you for that introduction. I want to welcome all of you to the CSDA virtual tour. It's particularly delightful that we get the legislators and their staff to be aware of how important special districts are to the state of California. In our case, we were formed in 1949 by an act of the legislature. Sonoma Water is a special district. And the project that you just saw, the video that describes the AQPI system, is a wonderful example of how a coordinated effort with special districts can accomplish and help solve some of the vexing issues that California is facing with regard to extreme weather and climate change. I think best to fill in some of the gaps that weren't covered in that video is an explanation that we need to continue to fund the atmospheric river research in order for our collective well-being in the Bay Area. The hope is that that state investment is going to succeed and help inform other regions that could benefit from an AQPI-like system. So atmospheric river research, the last couple of years, the legislature has been good and beginning to fund a multi-year strategy for that, along with our colleagues down at Scripps Institute for Oceanography and CW3E. In the Bay Area, the 7.6 million residents are benefiting from an investment from the California Department of Water Resources with an initial grant to install 4 of those X-band radars that we talked about earlier. They are designed specifically to carry the precision below where existing radars are focused. So those next bad radars that are currently employed by the Weather Service surrounding are generally aimed significantly higher above the area where the AR action is occurring. So an investment of 4 X-band radars, 2 have been installed, 1 at Valley Water down in San Jose and 1 up in Sonoma and Santa Rosa at our treatment plant. Another will be coming online at Rocky Ridge over in the East Bay with our partners at Alameda County Water and East Bay Mud and that coalition. And then the last is due to go up in the peninsula through the San Francisco Public Utilities District. So a collaborative effort designed to provide more precise information on where the atmospheric activity is going to occur. And I mentioned earlier in the video that atmospheric rivers tend to have a hard southern edge, which literally stalls out, and where that takes place has huge implications for our region. So for example, back in 2017, when the state climatologist Mike Anderson was referencing a flood year, I hearkened back to the Contra Costa flood control district, which was experiencing significant rainfall, and they had to essentially put staff all throughout the region to try and identify where flooding and major incidents were going to occur. They ultimately found, just prior to a large roadway collapsing, a location they could address resources and needed to act upon. Had AQPI been installed at that time, they would have been able to more accurately focus in those resources into those bridges and vulnerable roadways that are very expensive to replace and repair once they've been damaged. More recently, these last atmospheric rivers that hit our Bay Area and the state in mid-October, the 22nd, 23rd, 24 incidents, extreme event, but the existing radars that were used by NextBand were too high on the Unum Ridge where the current one is. So Santa Clara Valley's radars were able to detect at a lower elevation and prevent flooding in many areas. In our case in Sonoma, another example, this last atmospheric river hit the Russian River hard. We were able to use our existing radar to more precisely gauge exactly where the high flooding was going to occur. We had an existing pipeline replacement project underneath the Russian River, which was terribly threatened by that particular event. We were able to button that up with advanced warning and time to be able to get out ahead of that particular crisis and secure the site so that our water supply for over 600,000 customers was not compromised. And we're still preparing and using those 2 radars for that type of precision. One other thing that may be of interest to folks that are thinking about resource allocation and looking at climate change and extreme weather is the situation of fire. I happen to believe that these radars, the X-band radars, are going to be particularly helpful in actually the detection of fire around the Bay Area. What's important about that is we'll also be able to take the information gleaned to further integrate the models that are going to be looking at predictive characteristics, the direction that fire may be going, to better plan on our ability to control those fires. In addition, with regard to fires, it's hoped that the radars will be able to better identify the potential burn areas and help communities avoid flash flooding. You'll all recall what happened down in Santa Barbara and more recently up in the Sierras. Fire decimates a region often, and the onslaught of extreme weather, high precipitation, can result in those flash flooding events and the need to respond very quickly. So as Mike Anderson said, with regard to this project, AQPI is an initial investment from the California Department of Water Resources. It's through integrated planning that the Bay Area is working in close concert. So I've mentioned many of our partners. This is clearly a joint exercise, one that's going to, by itself, hold up and demonstrate the need for better, precise forecasting. And just a couple of examples of the magnitude, the Contra Costa damage report that I was talking about was 4.5 million that could have been saved had we been able to have an access on that. In Valley Water, there was a impact report that showed a savings of about 76 or so $1 million of flood avoidance damages as a result of having these type of radars. And that was based off a NOAA study that indicated if just half of the folks took advantage of these advanced warning through AQPI, you'd be receiving those type of benefits and avoided costs. So huge dividends being paid to the state of California for an initial investment that's being made. It's combining the integration of those radars with an operational platform that we are in the process of needing to deliver by 2024. So the hope would be that we'll get this network of up to 6 of these X-band radars plus one more radar off the northern coast of California to tie the entire Bay Area under this network, provide flood managers, sanitation managers, water purveyors, emergency responders into this network that can better respond, better predict the behavior of intense rainfall, and certainly protect lives from harm's way. So again, it's a real pleasure to be a part of the Special District's virtual tour for legislators and their staffs, the folks that care about these resources. I will just say I can't miss the opportunity to talk about the energy piece of this as well. As a special district, we were the first in California to actually in 2015 achieve carbon-free water. And I see some of our colleagues are now following suit to try and make the energy intensity of our water supply reduce the energy required and then make that renewable energy in the production and the distribution of water supply and sanitation services. So we're a proud member of CSDA. We're a partner today, and we encourage you to continue to stay active and investing in these special districts with very specific mandates, particularly when we're looking at extreme weather and responding better to climate change. So thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to any activity after the fact. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Grant. Incredibly impressive. And I know that there's a lot of you out there with questions. So please go ahead and start typing those in right now into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will filter through those and take them up at the end of the presentation. But next, Grant's comments about carbon reduction is actually a great transition into our next district, which is in the East Bay, AC Transit.
AC Transit is an innovator in zero-emission technology. AC Transit is a spatial transit district that serves the communities of Alameda and Costa County. We provide various transportation options for our 1.5 million community members. We have a large population that does not have a transportation option, and AC Transit really is the only means for transportation We serve them with not only reliable transportation options, but also clean transportation options.
Because we were early adopters with the zero emission technology, there was no blueprint available. We literally created it ourselves.
More than 2 decades ago, we launched with a single bus out of our Richmond division, and then we scaled up to 3 buses here at our Oakland division, and then we expanded the fleet to 13 buses. Now we've got an order in for another 45 buses. The fleet continues to grow, the technology continues to evolve.
AC Transit for over 20 years has been really leading the way on not only deploying new unknown technology, learning from that experience, and then working with the manufacturers to advance that technology. Right now we're operating the 4th generation of fuel cell buses, and we're building the 2nd and 3rd generation of infrastructure for battery electric bus and also for hydrogen fuel cell technology.
One of the things that we've learned as an early adopter of zero emission bus technology is not to deploy something today that is out of date by the time we deploy it. The technology moves so fast that what we have to do is we have to think 2 years ahead, because that's kind of our standard project cycle for the infrastructure. And the infrastructure has to be in place before the buses show up.
So we're very strategic when we plan on a bus purchase. And we do that through the request for proposal process. And we're very specific, from courses to training aids to time with the manufacturer and the subcomponent suppliers that the manufacturer works with. That sets us up for success.
AC Transit's Clean Corridors plan reduces toxins in the air by replacing on a 1-for-1 a diesel bus that is a polluter with a zero emission bus, therefore reducing all the pollutants that are transmitted into the air. And just to give an example, the Clean Corridors plan calls for 454 buses. That's an extraordinary amount of pollutants that we're going to remove from the air.
Because we're a special district, we have an elected board which has been able to provide policy guidance and allowed us to kind of reach to the future as opposed to reacting to what's happened in the past. And so their forward thinking is then passed down into our projects and how we implement the technologies.
For zero emission to work, it takes recruiting and hiring the right people. People matter as much as the product. There's no way that product exists on its own. Everything about public transit is people. We service people, and we want people to work in it. We want them to do it safely. We want them to do it skillfully. And everything we do, we're going to make accessible and scalable. And that's how our career ladder programs work. And that's what we're going to use to survive and evolve with this technology.
AC Transit is absolutely leading the way in the transit industry. Not only are we developing the procurement process, the deployment, the maintenance, we're also innovating in how we train the future generation of technicians, of operators, of our leaders, our management team.
AC Transit's Career Ladder program, it's a maintenance mechanic career ladder program. And at the core of that program is really supporting those folks, those employees without any skill sets to have an opportunity to advance their career. If you've got the interest and you've got the desire, but you don't have the skill set, we are able to work with you and provide you a career path.
So AC Transit Study is a roadmap on how to successfully deploy zero-emission buses. We went through many hurdles over 20 years, and we overcame those hurdles. And we put that in the study and in our plan so that other transit agencies, not only in the state of California, but around the globe, can benefit from the challenges that we already face. To make zero-emission buses work, we need federal and state governments and legislators to work together to provide resources and infrastructure so that we can continue to successfully deploy not only the fleets that we have today, but the scale up that will be required for the entire state by 2040.
Producing this video, I learned that zero-emission buses isn't as simple as just buying a bus that runs on gas or that runs on battery or that runs on hydrogen. It's much more complicated, as you could see in that video, and here to shed even more light on it and all of the great work and leadership that AC Transit has put forward, Claudia Burgos. Claudia, please take it away.
Thank you, Kyle. While my colleague tees up the presentation there, speaking of the videos, I want to thank you and your team for working with all of us special districts on the production of these videos. They're really quite amazing. AC Transit is very pleased to be here this morning, sharing with all of you in the California Special Districts Association virtual tour. I want to welcome all of the policymakers and legislative staffers that have joined us this morning. I see a few here from the Bay Area delegation. Thank you for being here. Climate change and the need to adapt with resiliency is incredibly critical to the future of our planet. For nearly 20 years, AC Transit has been making strides to lead the way to a zero emission future through clean transit and green jobs, as you saw in the video. We are very proud to be the largest public bus only system in California and the third largest bus only transit agency in the United States. We are based out of Oakland in the San Francisco Bay Area. As you can see from this map, our 364 square mile service area covers a population of 1.5 million East Bay residents. We operate a fleet of 640 buses. We have 6 facilities, and we employ a workforce of over 2,200 employees. AC Transit serves essential workers, individuals with limited or no alternative options to travel to their jobs, school, or essential appointments, and quite frankly, anyone wishing to reduce their carbon footprint. Prior to the pandemic, we were carrying 53 million riders per year. So ensuring the sustainability of AC Transit service is truly a matter of equity. As you can see from this slide, 65% of our riders are low income and 75% are people of color. We also carry nearly 30,000 students to school daily. And as a parent of a high school student, I have to say it is really quite something that I don't have to take my kid to school every day. He can rely on AC Transit to get there safely and on time. So whether you're a rider, you're an elected official, or a staff member to an elected official, and even if you drive, I guarantee you that anything that impacts AC Transit in one way or another impacts you too. I want to take a little moment to talk a little bit about some of the federal regulations and funding sources that are of critical importance to AC Transit. Both federal and state laws and regulations guide the development of our zero emissions programs. For example, the Federal Transit Administration requires us to maintain our fleets in what's called a state of good repair, which simply put means that our key assets like our buildings and our buses are safe to use and are in good working order and comply with federal regulations. That includes making sure that our buses that we purchase using federal funds meet the requirement that they have to stay active in service for at least 12 years or 500,000 miles. Little factoid for you there. So whichever comes first, we have to keep them in service for that amount of time. We are continuously reviewing our assets to improve our operations, and we document these efforts in what's called a transit asset management plan, which is submitted to the Federal Transit Administration. This ongoing exercise helps us better manage our resources, and it also helps us communicate with the public and policymakers about the benefits of investing in transit, as well as the consequences of underinvestment. And most importantly, our transit asset management plan supports our strategy to deliver zero emission buses into the communities that we serve. So making sure that federal funding is available to help us meet these and other mandates is a top priority for AC Transit. One key funding source for our zero emission program is the Federal Transit Administration's low or no emission vehicle program. So those of you that are on the call representing the federal level, you know what, you're probably familiar with this program. It offers competitive grants for zero emission buses and the facilities that support them. The program is key to achieving the Biden administration's goal of reducing greenhouse gases by 50% by the end of the decade. In fact, the recently passed infrastructure package increases funding for this low-no, which is what we call it for short, program from 55 million a year to 1.12 billion per year. It's a huge increase, but it also speaks to the huge need that we have across the country. So we are incredibly committed to compete for and secure these dollars so that we can provide greener service to the communities that we serve while doing our part to combat climate change. I want to thank the Special Districts Association for their leadership during the pandemic to secure and advocate for COVID relief set-aside funding at the federal level for special districts. Moving over to the state level, state laws and regulations also play an important role in our zero emission program. In 2018, the California Air Resources Board adopted an unfunded mandate known in the industry as the Innovative Clean Transit Rule, which requires all bus transit operators like AC Transit to operate a 100% zero emission fleet by the year 2040. We are now required to purchase only zero emission buses beginning in the year 2029. The transition is projected to cost AC Transit $1.1 billion for both zero emission buses and the infrastructure that's needed for their deployment. To meet the goals of the Innovative Clean Transit Rule, the state has established incentive programs that make critical funding for available to public transit agencies to help us achieve this transition. The state provides several vehicle incentive programs that are administered primarily through the Air Resource Board and California's State Transportation Agency. Infrastructure is overseen, the funding for infrastructure that is overseen through the California Energy Commission and is predominantly administered through the Clean Transportation Program. There's also a new program on the horizon for new heavy duty incentives known as the Energize program. All incredibly critical and important to help support the transition that all California transit agencies are going to have to achieve. So with all of that said, it might seem like there's no shortage of funding. However, many of these programs are incredibly oversubscribed, most notably the hybrid and zero emission truck and bus voucher incentive program known as HVIP, where transit agencies are unfortunately at a competitive disadvantage to private fleets for this first come, first served program, in part due to the complicated procurement regulations that public entities have to abide by. So AC Transit, one of the things that we're looking to do next year is to pursue legislation that will extend the current sales tax exemption for zero emission bus purchases for public transit agencies. That exemption is currently in place, but is set to expire on January 1st of 2024. So besides the public funding challenges that public transit agencies face in realizing this zero emission transition, by the year 2040, the whole process needs to be carefully orchestrated to ensure that the limited resources that are available in these programs provide the biggest impact. We need to ensure that infrastructure and vehicle deployments are all synchronized along with the necessary workforce to maintain the new technologies. You heard my colleague Mike talk about the workforce development needs in the video. Moving on to the next slide. The dangers of poor air quality are well documented, as is the data showing that disadvantaged communities, typically low-income communities of color, suffer the most. Areas identified as disadvantaged communities represent a disproportionate burden of populations living in economically depressed areas and with the worst 25% of the air quality in the state of California. We at AC Transit are doing our part to invest in healthy communities by improving air quality and health outcomes throughout our operations, particularly in those vulnerable communities that are impacted the most. AC Transit's Clean Corridors plan prioritizes the assignment of zero emission buses to 11 disadvantaged communities in our service area. President Biden's Justice 40 initiative aims to deliver at least 40% of the overall benefits from federal investments in climate and clean energy to disadvantaged communities, both in urban and rural communities. We are proud at AC Transit that our Clean Corridors plan does exactly what the Justice 40 initiative aims to do. For nearly 20 years, we've been making strides to lead the way to a zero emission future through clean transit and green jobs. I want to re-emphasize some of the key points from our video earlier today. The first is the procurement of these zero emission buses. As Kyle mentioned, it is very complicated. We need to replace all of our diesel engines with zero emission buses. And remember, we have a fleet of 640 buses. Currently, we operate two types of zero emission buses, battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell. This approach naturally builds resiliency into our zero emission program and allows us to respond to a public safety power shutoff or a natural disaster. Secondly, building the infrastructure to support the operations of a zero emissions fleet is incredibly expensive, but necessary. We estimate the price tag of transitioning the AC Transit bus fleet to zero emissions and building out the infrastructure needed to support the operations will cost us $1.1 billion. We have 4 operating divisions. We have an operating division in Hayward, one in Oakland, one in Emeryville, and one in Richmond. And currently we have zero emission infrastructure at only 2 of those 4 divisions. And then thirdly, the workforce development and training is a critical piece to the transition. And it's oftentimes a piece that is overlooked. Working on diesel engines versus battery electric or hydrogen is very different, and it requires a very different skill set. Trained and skilled hydrogen fuel cell or battery electric mechanics, they're not readily available on the job market. And this is going to be a big hurdle for the transit industry. It's going to take time to train and develop existing mechanics on the new technology. We have a project based out of our Hayward division to modernize our training and education center into a state-of-the-art advanced learning lab to help us with our workforce development needs, again, to help us achieve that 100% zero emission by 2040. The estimate to modernize that training and education center is $18 million, and that is an unfunded capital project. So in summary, policymaker support with funding and legislation that supports the purchase of clean vehicles and the infrastructure needed to support this. Again, at AC Transit, we estimate that cost to be $1.1 billion, another $18 million to modernize our training and education center, as well as equitable access to zero emission fuel cell options, some state level interagency coordination. These are all going to be important for that transition to zero emission to help us create a healthier environment and provide good paying and secure jobs in your districts. With that, here's some contact information for us at AC Transit. We'll also drop it in the chat a little later, and I will turn it back over to you, Kyle. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claudia. And now we're going to return to some of the effects of our changes in our climate and the warming of our climate, and one of the disasters that happened back in 2018 that we can all remember, the Camp Fire.
Paradise Police 911. We got a big fire. Oh, it's huge.
We knew that a devastating fire could occur, and we'd always prepared for it in a lot of different ways, but we never saw anything along the lines of the devastation that the Camp Fire created.
I'm on the end of Dreher Drive in Paradise on the West Branch. The fire has come over the top of Sawmill Peak.
There was fire on all sides. Wherever you looked, there was going to be fire.
Paradise is located in Butte County. It's about halfway between Sacramento and Redding.
Pretty much everything that was ready to burn burned, and that meant the leaves and pine needles, but it also meant vegetation around homes themselves. And then once the structures started to burn, it became sort of a domino theory. I serve on the town's Emergency Operations Center as their Emergency Operations Coordinator. During the fire, there were some changes in how things are done early. And what I mean by that is that the firefighting force announced on the radio clearly that they're not fighting the fire, they're just getting people out.
The roads were so crowded and people were sitting in their cars for 2 and 3 and 4 hours.
Places like the park that we're in right now served as a spontaneous, safe refuge area for people.
This is a pavilion that is used for all kinds of events. The day of the fire, it became a shelter in place. There was probably 70 or 80.
And people were able to survive the fire because of the reduced fuels, because of the facilities, because of the landscape. When I started as a firefighter in 1971, we had fire seasons, like clockwork. Every October it rained. Every October we buttoned up the station, closed it, and then we came back in June, and we did that at that station for probably 30 years. Well, that's not what happens anymore. That fire station's open year-round, fire season's year-round. Until 2008, we had no record of losing a residential structure to a wildland fire.
Prior to the fire, we had a population of about 26,000 in Paradise, and now we have a population of about 6,500.
And what the rec district has taken on is an opportunity to look at open land and combine recreation and open space as an opportunity to both recreate and protect our community and make it safer. I see the fire as great catastrophe brings great opportunity.
Defensible space instead of around a single home. What's that defensible space look like on a landscape scale? And that puts you in a different place as far as what those solutions might be. We have different visions that we've laid out here. One is a buffer, but we know in reality it's going to be discontinuous. And so maybe instead of a buffer around the town of Paradise, it's a string of pearls, clumps of land that can be managed on a sufficient scale. That's providing protection to the homes around it and then downwind.
Paradise Recreation Park District has taken a leadership role in the return of our community. They've stepped up to the plate and said, we're part of making a difference and we're going to make a difference, and they've done just that.
The benefits of the fire mitigation that we are working on is a win-win-win situation. It does provide other recreation activities, biking, hiking, walking, safety to the community for fire, and it does create the opportunity for revenue into the town of Paradise.
As the plan unfolds, it's really got a lot of facets, but mostly the concept is that it's integrated, that the land around the community is better managed and healthier, that the land immediately in the community provides opportunities for easy fire suppression, but also fire safety for people within the community, and that ultimately the people themselves have to make decisions about hardening their homes and making them safer. And to integrate it together, you've got a much safer community.
We need to create an environment where people feel not only they can come back because there's great things to do here, but confident that they're coming back to a community that has done something to reduce the wildfire risk.
I believe that people can build and live in a wildland urban interface area by doing it responsibly, taking into consideration the ecological fact, the economic fact, the environment, the carbon footprint. It takes an education, but I believe that people can do it and live there very comfortably, safely, and responsibly.
The future of a community is really going to be their willingness to embrace the fact that every single individual is part of the solution.
Paradise Recreation Parks District is a special district, and what that means is we have a board of directors that is elected by the community.
I think because our board members, our governance is local, that we're very responsive to what happens in our community and nimble.
It gives us ability to be innovative and create new programs.
For this to work, we absolutely need partnerships at the state and federal levels. There seems to be a lot of grassroots support for this concept, and yet we know it's going to take a lot of money to fund the acquisition, the initial management, create some avenues for that long-term management. But all three of those need to be in place. The initial estimates for this whole buffer, for example, intact would be about $30 million.
California is facing a housing crisis. It's important that people rebuild in Paradise, because where are they going to go?
And so I think what elevates our work here, it's not just for Paradise. It's a model that could be applied for other places. And I think it's very important that we succeed. There's that slogan that people like to use on parks make life better. For me, it's like parks save lives.
And now to learn more about the plan at Paradise Recreation and Park District and all of their great work, it's my pleasure to introduce their district manager, Dan Efsef. Dan?
Thank you, Kyle. Just a second as I get the screen. You know, that video did a fantastic job of, I think, portraying our efforts as well as the other districts. But I want to highlight some of these efforts and just give a little perspective on it. Certainly, one of the big anchor points for us is the Camp Fire and its aftermath. To have a community lose over 20,000 structures, most of those homes, has been devastating. We've lost community members' lives, and just the monumental costs are staggering what the community has to go through. The footprint of the Camp Fire is essentially the footprint of our district. We have been a special district since 1948. We're well in the fabric of the community. Our board members were also affected by the Camp Fire. 4 out of 5 of my board members lost their homes, as well as the majority of my staff. One thing that I think on that, I like that concept of districts, special districts are special and they're the most local, is that connection to the community. 1 week after the evacuation order was lifted, our district opened up an ice rink, and you may think that's an absurd response, but it was the 100% of my staff wanted to do something for the community. It was a beacon of hope. Every single one of the pictures that you see on the screen here has a special story associated with it. And we had out at our facility here over 2,000, maybe closer to 3,000 people that came out. There weren't 3,000 people living in the community at that moment in time. So it's pretty amazing how our district responded, and I think set us on a positive path. We did mention that parks make life better. If you woke up the day of the Camp Fire, that would be the slogan running through your head. However, by 10:45, it might be, if you were taking refuge in one of our parks, that's an important shelter point, and very important that we have a community that has these peppered throughout the area for people to enjoy the rest of the time. But it also serving as an important shelter in place, safer shelter in place location than their homes might be. We also know that we need to help heal our community. We have a community that is very much impacted by the effects of the Camp Fire, and even preceding that. This is a survey done in 2013, a study completed then. Butte County is the leading, they have the highest rate of adverse childhood experiences. And that has put us on a path of how do we help our population, how do we help our youth develop skills to help develop resiliency. And that has huge implications for behavioral health, and other social issues. There's a lot of hidden poverty that was uncovered post-Camp Fire. And I think these are important programs that we are supporting with partners. One thing that I think the modern approach to wildfires, it demands a new approach that we've had every year, unimaginable things from even 4 years ago, not to mention a lifetime ago, 25 years ago, and some careers firefighters talk about, as Jim did in that video. They are fundamentally different. And we have different weather, climate regimes. Our fuels have increased. And also, we have further intrusion into the wild and urban interface. So it adds for a complex problem that makes it more difficult to manage some of these areas. One thing that is raised oftentimes is, will building code solve that? I think there's some analogies. I had 10 years of floodplain restoration work, and you have to take, to protect communities, a scale that matches that threat. And I think that we're looking at that with these landscape level decisions. Defensible space around a home, absolutely important. And what we're looking at is defensible space around a community. Some of that will change, provide a redistribution of homes, we think, in our area, and also buffers to help us fortify, manage, come up with different uses of those lands that would be high risk and threaten the whole community. I like to think of us as taking a multiple bottom line approach. Our future in paradise is going to be a recreation and technology future. We need a rec and tech associated also with kind of forest management. These buffers can provide and solve some of the major issues that face our area, reduces fire risk, creates those more opportunities for a healthy population. Blue zones we're looking into, connect some of those dead end roads, and create some interconnected trail systems. If we become an outdoor recreation to help solve some of the recreation, the economic deficit that we have in our area, and can provide some revenue to help us sustain these areas. Thought it'd be helpful just to provide an example of how this looks. What does it look like in the hillside? If you're in the 1950s and 60s, you look at the world pretty flat. You know, you would look at subdivision map on this. You would have off in the distance would be West Branch to Feather. You'd sell homes. You'd sell plans for it. As we know now, it's a much more complicated environment and can't take a subdivision by subdivision look. These are roads that are now dead end, that aren't interconnected, steep hillsides, part of that wildfire behavior triangle with heavy fuels. And these are high fire risk areas. So one approach is that these are integrated management, which could be a variety of tools that we use, that we're creating not only connections on the roads, but also recreational opportunities and ability to get into these areas to do fuels management, to do fuels reduction, and even fight fires in a better way. So what does this look like so far? We had a very well done study, qualitative, but it provides some really good information for us to look at whether this is a reasonable concept for our area. And so the left and right here represent the pre-campfire conditions. The right is looking at some scenarios on changing the fire landscape, reduces in a relative reduction in risk. Now, you may certainly wonder what the costs are. Looking at preliminary benefit cost analysis, this particular project, $39 million, has a benefit cost ratio, a benefit of almost 4 to 1. Something else that's coming out here shortly is a study that will look at quantifying the financial benefits. This is taking our preliminary information, running it through insurance models and through their own fire modeling, and it's going to yield some good results. I wish I could share with you the URL for it. It should be out within days here, so please feel free to contact me on it. One of the important things is it reduces risk and losses. So looking at a reduction of 42% annually and reducing these events from what now is a 1 in 100, maybe more frequent with current climate changes, to a 1 in a 350-year event. So a very significant change that way. Another important, I think, finding from this study from our partners is looking at how community scale based catastrophe insurance could change this incentives of creating good things on the landscape. And so I think there's some really important thing and work that could happen there. And finally, I think this is something very important as we're looking into pushing into these wildland-urban interface areas. It allows for a more comprehensive, more integrated management that restores habitats, restores the fire regime. California, it has a lot of habitats and species that are fire dependent. And so we need to reintroduce that into our environment to help reduce those risks and help make those forests more healthy. So one thing I like to vision out is what do we look like in 2045? We're doing some significant planning, some dream and hope catching, and looking at transforming our community to get to that rec and tech economy, make us safer. And that's going to be some important things coming up in the future. So what's going on right now? We are hopefully awaiting approval on a building resiliency in communities, funding applications through FEMA and Cal OES that will look at kind of next steps and quantify some of this. We'll also have some new acquisitions that are coming up and important partners and coordination. Finally, just a few things that we're looking at, and these are big things for us. Looking at the buffer and a buffer demonstration model using existing lands coming up, capital improvements for the entire district, a crew dedicated to fuel and fires and trail work, supporting our youth resiliency programs, looking at ag tourism, diversifying our revenue, and then providing, looking into these kind of, I would say, community insurance and ecological services mechanisms. Not only do these fire risk reduction strategies result in reduced risk to homeowners, they also have benefits for air quality, water quality. We're at the start at Lake Oroville and the state water system. And then I think looking at us, we're as a small district with a lot of ideas, what are things and partnerships we can do to help even the playing field? Just a couple of other things I'll mention is, I hope today's programming has showed this, but there's a lot of innovation that is coming from these special districts that are tackling global issues. And I think that's super important for us to pursue and maintain. We need that capacity to keep that going. There's some ideas, suggestions we have on streamlining CEQA. And some of our partners find it very important that that's kind of a next step to not only minimize long-term damage to ecosystems, but provide those immediate needs to reduce fire risk. For us, one of the huge improvements or kept us afloat was the backfill. Looking at a prescription post-catastrophe, how to keep these special districts functioning is very important. And then also just hurrying through this real quickly is looking at job training and staff training for us. And I think us as a state needs to look at our models for recovery. I very much appreciate the opportunity to speak to you guys today. I know that we're short on time, and so I will happily kick it back to Kyle so we can get to some questions. Kyle?
Thank you so much, Dan. And speaking of questions, as folks have questions, please go ahead and start typing those into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our very best to get to every question that we can. The first question is for Dan, actually. And Dan, you know, Paradise was the first community here in California that I'm aware of to have essentially nearly a total loss, to nearly completely burn down. But sadly, it hasn't been the last. We've seen it happen in each of the last couple of years with several of our special districts bearing the brunt of that. You've had this plan, this idea, this vision featured in the New York Times, in Bloomberg. I mean, we've seen article after article on it. It's really getting the imagination, the intention of lots of folks, engineers, scientists, forest managers. People are excited about it. But now we're here with state and federal officials talking to them. How do we get it done? What do you need to get this done? How can we partner with the state and federal government?
Yeah, there's a lot of potential barriers to this. Funding is certainly one of it, but I think there is sort of this hunger, this need, as we've seen each year. Even just in Butte County, we've had the North Complex, the Bear Fire, the Dixie Fire. All that's been within a few miles of the start of the Camp Fire, yet have had huge impacts for not only our region, but the entire state. So I think there needs to be a fundamentally a different view of how we look at these and a more proactive view. 150 million went into fighting the campfire. A small fraction of that would be beneficial on an annual basis to help reduce those risks, fundamentally get to some of the healthier forests. So I think there's some cultural things. The science needs to catch up, but also there's some things we could do now that are good practices that can happen today with investment into these properties, integrating the management of it, working with some of the other partners and spreading some of the risks out. Well, one of the most important things I think for me, and I think a lot of people have seen this in floodplain areas, for example, that you may be able to get the initial dollars for capital, but what's the maintenance come from? How is it sustainable over time? And I think one of the key aspects of this approach that has captured the imagination, frankly, of a lot of people in our area and elsewhere is the multiple benefits aspect of it. So I think oftentimes when people think about a buffer, they're thinking about it's a fire, what's traditionally thought of as a fire break. What we're talking about is a healthy forest, shaded fire break that may have prescribed burning on the understory, but also grazing, agriculture, play fields, and so forth. So these all provide, trails are a huge thing in our area, provide some economic incentive, provides that economic backbone that helps sustain that area and keep the grass green and the lights on by having that economic connection and making these desirable places to live. So I think it's kind of it kind of checks a lot of boxes for people.
Thank you, Dan. Next question here is for Grant at Sonoma Water. And Grant, if we can pull you back up on screen here. Similar question. What you're doing there is fascinating. The benefits seem obvious from the stats that you shared in terms of the cost savings. I think probably our attendees from other parts of the state that are outside of the Bay Area are wondering, well, what about us? What could AQPI do for us? Maybe you have some insights on that, Grant.
Well, thanks, Kyle. The intention all along is to take this investment that DWR has made to the AQPI system through the Bay Area and get the radars installed and begin the operating structure to take advantage of the better precision. The thought is that there's a lot of other areas in California that could benefit from a similar approach. So, for example, in my view, we learned a lot, by the way, after our fires from the community of San Diego. There was some great special district communication going on, what to expect. And in fact, our own pilot for fire cameras came out of our work with UC San Diego and the folks down at Scripps. So I would just say there's a logical spot where San Diego would be an area where you could employ a series of X-band radars and get the same type of benefits I would expect that the Bay Area will achieve. Likewise, I know the state climatologist is looking at the area of Los Angeles, very big area, but the same set of circumstances where those coastal mountain ranges are going to be where the ARs are collecting and dumping in large volumes of water in short periods of time. And I'd also say that the Central Valley and areas that are naturally formed that could benefit off a series of interlinked radars that will provide a methodology for exact, precise measures of where the rainfall is going to occur and how folks with advanced warning can get out of harm's way and begin to elevate stuff and reduce damages. So I think there's a tremendous amount that can be learned as long as we can get this up and running and functioning.
Thank you, Grant. My next question here is for Claudia. And Claudia, even with AQPI, I don't think anybody could have foreseen the pandemic that we've all experienced for the last year or two here. And it's hit probably very few industries as hard as it's hit the transit industry. What, Claudia, is AC Transit doing right now in terms of the pandemic? And how do you see a post-pandemic world for transit and specifically for AC Transit?
Thank you for that question, Kyle. So I think public transit is going to continue to play a central role in all things post-pandemic, right? If you think about it, public transit, we're in the public health business, we're in the climate change business, we're in the economic mobility business, and we play a key role in correcting racial inequities, right? So if you think about housing, affordable housing near transit is an equity solution that saves families time and money. We connect people to resources, schools, jobs, and those jobs that have, those individuals have sustained us throughout the pandemic. Having fewer cars on the road means, just fewer people driving, cleaner air. Post-pandemic, it's going to be important that people become comfortable with getting back on public transit. We have seen, as you mentioned, Kyle, huge impacts to public transit throughout the pandemic. We are currently operating 83% service levels. Our ridership is still down about 50%, but we really do need people to be comfortable with getting back on transit. We are seeing that our roads are in some cases more crowded than they were pre-pandemic. It is safe to take transit. We have invested in cleaning, sanitizing. We're providing masks on our buses. We're providing sanitizer on our buses. There are no known cases of transmission on public transit. It is safe to ride public transit, and it is the right thing to do, and it is good for the environment to make sure that as people begin to sort of navigate out of the pandemic, returning to work and getting out and about more, that folks are not afraid to get on transit, that it is safe, it is clean, it is reliable, and it is good for the environment. And hopefully people stay out of their cars and choose public transit instead.
Thank you, Claudia. And I will tell you, I actually didn't plan this, but I rode SAC RT to work today. So there you go. Living proof, I survived. Here I am. Thank you, Claudia, for the answer to that. We have another question that's come in actually for you as well, and that is, what is included? This is one of the stats I think that you provided in your PowerPoint presentation earlier. What is included in the $18 million investment in education and training? How will it impact your ability to recruit and hire qualified techs, mechanics, et cetera?
Thank you, James, for that question. So the $18 million investment is a capital investment. So that's what we estimate it will cost to completely overhaul our training and education center, which quite frankly, all of the AC Transit facilities are old and in need of upgrades. Overall, we do have a master facilities plan that calls for a $2.1 billion investment to bring all of our facilities up to current standards. I mean, I probably shouldn't say current standards. They do meet current standards, but to upgrade all of our facilities, $2.1 billion. So the $18 million investment is focused on the capital improvements of upgrading that facility. Again, it's located in Hayward. And long-term, we envision partnering with community colleges to develop a training and education program. As Mike Flocchini, our training manager, mentioned in the video, we do have a career ladder program here at AC Transit where we run our mechanics through that program as a sort of ladders of opportunity for our internal employees. But long-term, we do hope to partner with a local community college to expand that program and sort of reach deeper into the communities that we serve.
If there are no additional questions at this point, I'm going to give each of our panelists an opportunity to share a final word in case there was anything that didn't come up that they were hoping to cover, or a question they were hoping to hear from one of you in the audience, or maybe it's just a last word to leave you with. So first, I'm going to go ahead and start off with you, Dan, from Paradise Recreation and Park District. Dan, what is it that you'd like to leave our attendees with after this tour?
I guess first of all, just thank you for the opportunity to speak to folks today. This is an area of immense progress that's going to be made over the next few years. And I think it's very important that we get that support. We know the partnerships. We don't know all that we may need to know by the time we get to kicking this off. And so I think there's much to be written about where we go from here. But I think this is vital importance to not only our community, but the entire state of California and Western states, any place that lives in a fire regime. So we're looking at things to become a model for the state. And I think that there's a unique opportunity here to address some issues. But again, I just want to thank CSDA and participants for being here and the other panelists. It's very inspiring and humbling to see what special districts can accomplish. So just wanted to thank you.
Thank you, Dan. And next we'll go to Grant Davis, the General Manager at Sonoma Water. Grant, what would you like to leave our attendees with?
Thanks, Kyle. I think genuinely, I've also enjoyed being part of this panel in the lead up to it. The information that was exchanged is very valuable and gives insights. Special districts, from my perspective, can leverage dollars just about unlike any other entities. And by working in collaboration and partnership, certainly in our own case, there is a substantial return on the investment. That the state is so essential, though, in helping to support and to leverage. Their investments allow us to get beyond what our normal jurisdictions might be and to collaborate, to break down some of the silos and the difficulty of working amongst geographic regions or jurisdictions. So the state providing support for coordinated efforts that have huge dividends that can be replicated are really a message I want to support. And I thank those that are looking at this vehicle for helping solve some vexing issues that deal with climate change and extreme weather.
Indeed, thank you, Grant. And we'll close with Claudia from AC Transit. Claudia Burgos, what would you like to leave our attendees with?
Thank you, Kyle. Again, thank you for the opportunity to participate in today's wonderful event. This has been a lot of fun, and I really hope that it has been informational and educational for all of the attendees. The innovative clean transit rule that transition to 100% zero emission for public transit agencies in California and funding to support that transition is going to be incredibly important and critical for all of us, not just AC Transit, but again, any public transit agency in the state of California that operates a bus fleet. We are all subject to this unfunded mandate of 100% zero emission buses by the year 2040. Starting in the year 2029, we have to purchase zero emission buses. That means that we have to have the infrastructure in place to support those buses and ultimately get to that 100% transition by 2040. So funding at the state level and at the federal level is going to be incredibly important to help us all achieve this big but important goal for our communities. We are hopeful that the transition is going to have huge positive impacts for the environment throughout the state of California. And so we look forward to working with policymakers, agencies, staff to ensure the funding is available for a successful transition. Thank you.
Claudia, Grant, Dan, at CSDA, we are so proud to represent you and the other 120,000 frontline workers across the state that are working for the 2,000 independent special districts in the state. And we believe that through this tour, we hope that the attendees have been able to see just how community-driven and future-focused special districts are. Of course, we are happy to answer additional follow-up questions, provide additional presentations, come in for a meet and greet, set you up with any of your local special districts in your community or region, and learn more about how special districts are at the cutting edge of solving these world-class problems with world-class solutions. Whether large or small, they're important to their communities and they're important to our special districts. Thank you for taking your time and investing it in attending this virtual tour. We hope that next year we can get you on an in-person tour And we'll probably be setting up another virtual one too, just to make it easy for everyone. So with that, look us up at csda.net, reach out to our office. We're always here to help and to serve you. Thank you for being here.